So today, as I said, we've got Michael today talking to us on systems thinking. Without further ado, let me introduce you to Michael Hamilton, who will take us through systems thinking. Michael, over to you.
Thanks very much, Carl. First of all, could I ask everybody to turn their cameras on? Because I thought that the way that we would organize today, I'm not sure how how it's gone before, but I thought that we would kind of treat today a bit more like a workshop than a kind of series of talks on systems changes, which means I'm going to be putting you into groups to kind of talk to each other and answer questions together and that kind of stuff. So there's not too many of us here to have our cameras on, so that's grand. What I'd like to do first of all is I'd like everyone to fold their arms, just to kind of sit back or stand back and just fold your arms. And has everybody, Leon, have you managed to fold your arms while you're taking your blood pressure and your whatever else it was you said you were doing, your blood sugars? And so now I'd like you to just unfold your arms and to just refold them the other way, so with the other arm on top. And I just kind of wonder how that feels for people when you kind of fold them the other way. Anybody? In fact, why don't we all switch our microphones on? Because I'm sure we're not going to kind of disturb each other, and it's quite nice sometimes to have a bit of background noise. And so, Deborah, how was it for you when you folded them the wrong way, the other way?
Okay, it feels different. It feels different. Yeah, it feels different. It doesn't slot in as naturally the way I'm used to doing it, if that makes sense. So when I do it the other way, it has to be a bit more of a conscious effort. I can do it, but it doesn't slot in as nicely. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's how I feel.
Did your arms the wrong way?
I didn't feel anything. I just was following your instructions. So
okay, so why don't you just try folding your arms the way you naturally fold them now, and then just unfold them and fold them with the other arm on top now. So unfold them and fold them again with the other arm on top. Exactly the same for you, or did it feel different to you, or?
Same. I just feel different because you say that you're asking that question, but
right.
Yeah, it's just
really okay. Mama?
Mine, the right side feel heavier, but because I'm holding maybe a bag.
Right, okay.
The left side is light.
Right, okay. Nicole, I saw that you were doing it while we did it. What did it feel like you to swap arms?
Yeah, like heavier, like the other arm was more effort, more weighing down. It felt a bit unnatural.
A bit unnatural. Who else? Kevin, are you with us? No? Carl, did you do it? Dana, Carl, did you do it?
I did it, and I like with Deborah and Nicole, I actually found it awkward, uncomfortable, and I felt that there's more weight being applied using that, doing it that way, and the way that I'm more used to.
Okay, all right, grand. And I kind of did that exercise to start us off with, because quite often when people are beginning to think about systems thinking is that we kind of have this level of discomfort, because in a way the kind of systems thinking is counterintuitive and works in many ways against the way that many of us are used to working. We're used to working where we're kind of trying to solve a particular problem in a particular moment and moving from problem to solution. And system thinking calls for you to do something other than that. and we'll kind of get to what it calls you to do in a few moments. What I'd like to do now is I'm going to put you into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I'm going to put you into 3 groups. And in your groups, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to think about the difference between complexity and complicated. So what I'd like you to do in your groups is to have a discussion about what you think is the difference between something being complex and something being complicated. Do you want to ask me any questions? Is that really clear? Okay, I'm going to put you into 3 groups of there's going to either be 3 or 4 of you in a group, and I'll leave you in your groups for 10 minutes. The difference between complex and complicated is a question that we're trying to answer. Hey, I can see everybody. I can see everybody except for Kevin. Oh, I can even see Kevin now. Hello, Kevin. Okay, can everyone turn your microphones on? Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, if we kind of start getting feedback from people, maybe we might need to switch our individual ones off. But it kind of just feels more like you're in a space with people. I just think if the microphones are on. And so perhaps what we haven't done is introduced each other to each other. So perhaps as you kind of do your kind of feedback from this session, you could open your feedback just saying your name and your organization, and then kind of go into your feedback. So who wants to kick us off? The differences between complicated and complex.
I don't mind. I don't mind.
Okay, go for it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Francine. Myself and Leon, we run an organization called 360 Degrees Lifestyle Support Network, which we empower individuals on their lifestyle journey by providing access to education, support from peer support, also from professionals and practitioners in the community. So that's what we do. So we discussed what is complex and what is complicated. So we came to the conclusion that complex is when you have something in front of you and you look at it and you just haven't got a clue. You can't see the end of it. You can't see the for example, a distance. When it's complex, you just look at it and you just think, oh my gosh, I don't know where. But when it's complicated, what's complicated to me is not complicated to Charles or to Joseph, because it's a personal thing. Complicated could mean that I can see the end of the tunnel, but it's not a straight route. It means that I have to duck and dive and over and under and bob and weave, whereas Joseph might just see straight ahead and he'll walk straight past me and goes, I don't know what you're on about. What's complicated about this? Just get on with it. But it's complicated is personal, complex is more mind-blowing. And just before we ended, I said, what is it very similar to perplexed? Where, what is that something different? Because in my head, complex, perplexed, all of them sort of things are all like, I ain't got a clue. So that's me. That's our group.
Thanks very much. Who wants to go next?
Does anybody in our group have anything to add? Was that correct?
No, that's fine. I think that's good. I think you said it all.
Okay. I think we said the question itself was complicated.
You did.
Go on. I can hear somebody eating a packet of crisps. That's cool. Cool. Looked like the question was complicated.
In our group, and we were joined by Karina and Deborah, and of the group, Karina wasn't an Ubele associate, like the two of us, and so I'm going to introduce Karina. Not that she's going to necessarily speak. I'm going to put her on the spot, but she relates to an organisation called BUD, just to sort of give BUD a plug. But in our group, we talked about messiness, and complex denotes messiness, and complicated denotes trying to find a solution to a situation, and we variously talked about things like unruliness, and there's no natural flow in terms of a complicated situation, no rules, no structure. Whereas in a complex scenario, there's some understanding. It might look confusing to others outside of it, but there is an order, and there are systems, and there's flow. When I use the example of driving in Jamaica, where there's no one stops at traffic lights and bits and pieces. Well, certainly the part I'm familiar with, but there's no accident. I'm not saying there's no accident on the island. There is. What I'm saying is people know when to stop and let people go past. And you'd say, well, where's the traffic lights?
Is that complex or complicated?
Well, I was saying it was complex. I would say it's more complex.
Complex.
Yeah, because
what
people
makes it complex? What makes it?
It was complex because for you from the outside, it just looks chaotic. It just looks like a mess. But in actual fact, there is order to it, and so people know when to stop, and yeah, they'll blow their horn as they do. But you don't even get irate about it. You just allow it because that's what happens. And for you who are not used to it, it's annoying, frustrating, and why do you need to do it? So there's a system, but it's not necessarily the system you know.
Right. Okay.
And would I want to change it? Perhaps I would, but you know something, I could live with that.
Sorry, Nicole, you lifted your finger as if you wanted to say something. Was that just?
No, I was telling them to shh.
Any response from my two colleagues who was with me?
I would agree with what you said. I think that, yeah, I'd concur with what you said, because I think that, yeah, complex kind of looks a little bit complex, but that it had some sort of system to it. I don't know, some sort of system that you need to understand, but you don't understand necessarily, that you may not understand. Yeah, so I would concur. I think we had quite a in-depth discussion about the two, but there was a bit of a fine line, we kind of thought as well. We kind of thought that in some ways they kind of not quite mirror each other, but there's a little bit of overlap in some places, or that may be just the way we're thinking.
Tell me about the overlap, Deborah. Tell me about the overlap. Tell me about the overlap.
Thought about it too deeply. I weren't expecting that, but just kind of, I don't know, there just seems to be a kind of overlap that some people, I'm not going to say anybody, but you know, some people may get the two confused. One may, you know, some people may think one means one thing and one means another, or they both mean the same. There could be that confusion where someone might say, well, don't they mean the same thing? So in that way, there could be some overlap. It might be that there's some parts in one and
words interchangeably, don't we? Often we just kind of use the two words interchangeably as if they mean the same thing. Yeah. And the third group, who was in the third group?
That was me and Leon and Mama Silla.
Okay.
We had, I liked Leon's first one, that this Facebook status is complicated.
The Facebook status is complicated.
Yeah, it says complicated.
Tell us why, Leon. No. Tell us why is the Facebook status complicated?
For a lot of people, that's where you normally see the word it's complicated, which means that it's messy and the person can't be bothered to explain the entanglement.
Ah, right.
So they just put down
That's interesting.
Right.
Yeah. But we're saying that there's interconnected parts when it's complicated, and complexity has many different parts, but they're connected. You can see a connection.
Say that again, wait.
So complexity, many different but connected parts.
Many different but connected parts.
Yeah, and then complicated, interconnecting parts.
Interconnected parts.
It's a bit like a Rubik's Cube. A Rubik's Cube may seem like just the colors, but you know that it's complicated because underneath the colors, there's a whole web of network that goes on to connect them, to join them. And if you get it wrong, it's not working out. There's a set method to it, but you can't see how complicated it is. You just see the colors.
Complex or complicated, the Rubik's Cube, would you say, Leon?
I'd say it's complicated.
You'd say it was complicated. Yeah. Kevin, we've not heard from you.
I mean, yeah, initially, like you said, I thought the two words were pretty much interchangeable. So I was like, this question is complicated as it is. But given it a bit of thought, I think the difference between complex and complicated, I would say they can both share a level of difficulty, but with contemplative, what was the first one? Complicated. With complicated, there's a sort of established route that you can take. It might be difficult, but it's pre-established. People have done it before. There's a format or like some sort of flow chart that you can follow, and you get to your outcome. With complexity, it's generally something like a project where it's never been done before, or it's been something that's been approached for the first time. So there's a lot more unknowns, and there can be sort of like a dynamic relationship with those unknowns as well. So it's like you're starting from, not from zero, but you're starting from a point where you need to figure out where you're going first and how things go, and then gradually sort of discover an underlying system, I guess, to fix what or to achieve your outcome. And yeah, that sort of contrasts with the first one, where there's already like a predetermined sort of route and pathway that you can take.
Okay, thanks. Do you want to add anything, Joseph, before we yeah, why don't you add something, Joseph? Hello, Joseph, how are you doing, sir?
Hello, Lord Michael.
I've not seen you for a while, sir.
Well, sorry about that.
Getting all the way in there.
Your lordship has not ordered me to come. Anyway, yeah, we had a nice discussion at our group, and there is this idea of if someone is perplexed, what does that make the situation complex and I think I suggested that being perplexed, that is feeling, not that the situation is complex or complicated. That is personal, because someone else can approach that same situation and just walk over it. So that clarification was made. I think that's what I want to what our group spokesperson.
In 60 seconds, we're not allowed more than 60 seconds. I don't know what you're doing with this packet of crisps, Charles.
I was just trying to hide it. I was just trying to hide it, but I promise I'll put it away now.
Oh, we can hear it.
Busted.
In 60 seconds, what I'd like everybody to do is to just grab a pen and to just write down a challenge that you have in your work, in your life somewhere, just a challenge, any challenge. One managed to think of one. We'll come back to them later on. But in the meantime, what I'd like to do is kind of, I asked a question, so I should attempt in some ways to answer that question. So I'm going to share my screen and just kind of share a piece not written by me about the differences between complexity and complicated. And I think it kind of follows in line with most of what I've heard people saying. All of the things that we use in the session are in a Google folder. And what I'll do is I'll give you a link to the Google folder, which has got a whole load of kind of resources around systems change. Yeah. And so I'll give you that link, and then Ubele will probably send that link out to you again after the session. And so you can access everything that we use, plus some other things about systems change in the folder that I'm going to send to you. So, okay. So let me try to share my screen quickly. And are people seeing, this document?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it looks at it. I've got this line in the middle of it, but it's gone now. It looks at in more detail at the differences between complex and complicated. It says a complicated has a linear cause and effect pathway, allowing us to identify individual causes for observed effects. Yeah. And so I always think of that in terms of when I look at the engine of a car, I go, oh my God, that's really complicated. But actually, I know, or I used to know in the olden days when you looked under your bonnet, that if your car was sparking wrong, you could change a spark plug and it would start sparking right. Yeah, there was a kind of linear cause for the thing that's going on. But in complex, because we're dealing with patterns arising from networks of multiple interacting and not interconnected causes, there's no clear distinguishable cause and effect pathway. Yeah, and so I kind of, the biggest kind of thing that I always think that is complex are families. Incredibly complex networks of kind of connected but independent forces that kind of come together. Lynn, oops, somebody's phoning me. I don't know what on. I don't know. Oh, it's my mum's phoning me. Hang on. Sorry.
We just talk about family connection.
Everything's connected now.
Family, yeah, family.
All of the different bits, complex or complicated. I think it's complicated because I was able to just switch that off and it went away. So linearity is complicated. Every output of the system has a proportionate input. Yeah, Newtonian physics apply. Kind of very clever people understand what he means by that. But I think that what he means is that when you're looking at a complicated system, a car, you can say this bit does that. Yeah. And in a complex system, outputs are not proportional or linearly related inputs. Small changes in one part of the system can cause sudden and unexpected outputs in other parts of the system or the system's wider organization. So something tiny happening in a complex system can have a really big effect. Yeah. And then which one? And we'll go on to controllability and solvability. In complicated systems, contexts and interactions can be controlled, and the problems they present can be diagnosed and permanently solved. Yeah. In a complex system, problems present as emergent patterns resulting from dynamic interactions between multiple non-linearly connected parts. in these systems, we're really able to distinguish the real problem, and even small and well-intentioned interventions may result in disproportionate and unintended consequences. Yeah, and I think about that. I don't know why I think about that one in terms of football crowds. And if you have a kind of big crowd of people trying to go into a space, go through some turnstiles, if one person trips over, it can just have a massive effect on the whole thing. Yeah, and so a kind of small action by what looks like a tiny part of the system can have this kind of massive effect. It's important, I think, to just kind of get our heads around the difference between complex and complicated when we're thinking about systems change, because when we're thinking about systems change, we're thinking about working with complexity. And so systems thinking is the thinking of working with complexity. It's accepting that complexity exists and saying that that's what we have to work with. Does that kind of make sense?
There's a lot to it.
Say it again.
I'll just say, yes, it makes sense. There's a lot to it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no,
it's complicated.
It's complex.
It's complex. It's complex.
One of the most critical things, I think, about working with complex systems is who you are in that system. Yeah, because the way that you view the system has a real impact on where you think the leverage is in that system, or what even is important to work with in that system. Make sense? Yeah, that we bring who we are to the system. Let me share another document with you before we kind of break into pairs for a little while. And so if we look at, are we seeing this document which is called the Ladder of Influence? Inference, is that what we're seeing?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so if we look at the actual ladder here, yeah, what this is suggesting is that when we look at any system, that we start with the data that's available down here at the bottom of the ladder. Yeah. And so if we think about the problem of racism, yeah, that we start down here with all of the information we know about racism, that we then step up the ladder, and as we step up the ladder, we start to select data. So what's important for me in my understanding of race and racism, that I'm going to take up the ladder with me. As we go further up the ladder, we then paraphrase the data that was in the pool at the bottom of the ladder. We then start to name what's happening. And so all of the time that we're going up the ladder, we are deciding, we are making decisions about what data we are taking up the ladder. Yeah. So from this point here to this point here, where we decide what to do, we've already made a whole load of, oh, sorry, I'm pointing at it as if you can see me pointing. We've already made a whole series of decisions about the data that we're going to hold in order to decide what to do. Let me stop sharing. that diagram and all that goes with it is in the Google Drive. And so one of the most important elements that we kind of have to go into our understanding of systems thinking with is an understanding of ourselves and what we do to the data as we are moving up the ladder to decide what to do. I'm going to put you in pairs, and what I'd like you to do in pairs is just for, oh God, we're running out of time already. It's just for 3 minutes each to listen to each other, talk about the problem that you identified or the challenge in your work, but don't describe the challenge, describe your worldview that has an influence on that challenge. Describe who you are in that challenge. Does that make sense, Karina? Does that make sense, Karina?
Yes, makes sense. I was reading my challenge.
Does that make sense, Charles?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Does that make sense, Deborah?
Yes, it does.
So let me recreate the breakout rooms. I mean, it takes a long time when you're waiting for it, doesn't it? Oh, here we come. Hello, Gina.
Hello.
Hey, Gina, we're leaving our microphones on for this session.
Okay.
And so were people able to identify their own kind of the way that their own worldview might impact on the challenge that they're having? Or was that a complete misnomer?
No.
Go for it, Nicole. Was it you that said no?
Yeah, you lost me there.
Go for it.
I thought we were talking about how the world sees our challenge versus how we see it.
Oh, to tell us some more. It's not what we were talking about, but it's an interesting way. Go for it. Tell us what you mean.
Like, so I was explaining, like, this is how the world may see my challenge as something that is maybe not so big or so complicated, and maybe with a bit more self-confidence. Therefore, I will be able to overcome it. That's what I feel like the world's telling me about my challenge.
Uh-huh. Right, okay. But what you're saying about your challenge is what?
That I'm saying that actually it's more challenging. Like I tried to fight back to say I find it extremely difficult, regardless if you don't see it as a challenge, because they don't see it as they can't see it, it's invisible to them. But it isn't to me, and it's hard for them. They don't see it, yeah.
Okay, okay. Anyone else? I need to say hello to, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your name. Dinabu?
Hello. Sorry, I joined late. I was looking for the link, but someone just sent it to me.
Oh, that's grand. Could you say your name so that I can pronounce it right, please?
Dinabu.
Dinabu. Okay,
Yeah.
Dinabu, we're all having our cameras on for this session. Is that okay?
Right. I'll put my cameras on if you just give me one moment when I get to my workplace. I'm on the high street now, yeah.
All right, well,
So
when you do that.
looking towards back, yes, I will do, yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else in terms of their worldview and the way that their worldview impacts on their challenge? Leon, if you're talking,
yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah, or the wider choice of challenges, but you know, it's just the challenges that we face. It's like, imagine you got 12 moving parts, but we see the all 12 moving parts, but to everybody else, they only see 2 or 3 of them. So it looks simple, but when you're looking at all 12 parts, and some of them are interconnected, so you can't fix one little area, because it's connected to something else. And if you haven't done the previous step, then you will have difficulty on step 2 or 3. So you've not only got to work out what needs to do and how to get it done, but also in what order. But again, it's a challenge for us only because we're learning and we're new in our journey. So there are others that have been there and done what we're trying to do. Okay, so yeah, but it just depends, because it depends on what you can see. Those looking in can't necessarily see the full inner workings of everything that you're dealing with. It's like when you look at a person and they've got some screwed up look on their face, you're thinking, blimey, that person's miserable. But you don't know, they might have lost a loved one that very same day. You can't see inside a person's mind or heart. So we should try not to judge that person, but maybe have a conversation and find out, is everything okay? Is there anything that maybe I can help you with? They may not tell you, but they may tell you, but you give an opportunity. And then you'll understand that there's a reason why the person looks at the way they do.
Okay.
For example.
Thanks, Leon, for example.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Well, let me come in now. The challenge is really about COVID-19 and the fact that it's forced on us this kind of meeting, Zoom meeting, and all this internet thing, and as much as one can see the benefit. For instance, we have an international meeting without having to bother about air ticket and hotel and blah, blah, blah. That's a great benefit. But then there's this reluctance to really accept. One still prefer the old way of meeting and sharing tea and meeting people and shaking hands and things like that. So it's when you say how do you see yourself in it, I see myself as a reluctant passenger in this boat of having meetings and training through Zoom without meeting people, faceless people, and all sorts of things like that. For instance, you have not seen you for God knows when, and we're having meeting now, and when we met those days, we greet each other better than what we have now. Anyway.
Joseph, in a way, what you've said to me is that the data at the bottom of the ladder says, hang on, this is much more efficient.
Yeah.
It's much cleaner. It's much cheaper. It's easy. We can get more done in a day because we don't have the traveling time in between. So all of the data at the bottom of your ladder says, hang on, this is a far better way of doing things. But as Joseph is going up the ladder, he says, no, but I like to meet people. No, but I like the kind of interactions I have with human beings when we're in the same space. And so as you're going up the ladder and you're going to your kind of decision making or your action, it's informed actually much more by what Joseph likes than by the data at the bottom of the ladder.
What I'm used to.
What you're used to. And it kind of comes back to that kind of arms thing, doesn't it, we did at the beginning, where it's ever so slightly less comfortable to fold your arms the wrong way, and going up the ladder without the things that you like, that you love, that the last time I think we spoke, Joseph, we were able to move away from work and talk about pots and pans and having a pan party. Yeah, we would never do that on Zoom. And so, yeah. Let's watch a film actually about systems change and what it is to work with systems. I've just got to do this, and then I've got to do this. Sugar. Okay. While I solve this problem, what I'd like you to do is, can somebody tell me what a system is?
What's the system?
Yeah.
Is it a series of tasks and a set way of doing things?
Go on.
Like for example, McDonald's,
Yeah.
whether you believe in their food or not, in terms of quality, but they get teenagers who can't keep their rooms straight, but they're flipping burgers, and the burgers will all taste the same because they're following that system. If you do things out of sequence, then the burgers will come out different. And McDonald's reckon they've got a system so perfect that wherever you go in the world, it doesn't matter. Their system produces the results every single time. If you change the system, they'll take the franchise rights away. It's written in the contract.
Yeah.
So a system is when you predetermine how you're going to
yeah,
kind of follow a course.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's done to get consistent, regular results.
And you get consistent, regular results.
Yeah, but that's the whole idea of doing a system, so that the results you're going to get is the same every time.
And anybody else?
Sorry, Michael, did you say what is the system?
I've got the video working. I'm very clever indeed. So let me play the film and then we'll come back to what is a system.
We believe using systems thinking to guide our practice has the potential to deepen.
Can you see and hear it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Our impact. A great deal of our success hinges on the mindsets that propel a systems practice. In the social impact world, we face challenges that behave in complex, unpredictable ways that are constantly evolving, problems that seem intractable despite best efforts. To deepen our impact on these kinds of challenges, we embrace 4 key mindset shifts.
First shift in thinking is to seek help, not mission accomplished. It's attractive and can even be mobilizing to set our goal as a clear-cut, once-and-for-all solution, especially when working on difficult, high-stakes challenges. But complex systems don't get solved. They're constantly evolving and don't have a finish line. We are constantly striving to improve the health of the system, and this healthier system will address the problems we care about.
It's like leading a healthy lifestyle. It isn't something you check off your list when you lose a few pounds. It's something you are always working on. As you go about your life and your body changes, you continue improving and adapting to stay healthy.
A key to working toward healthy systems is to see patterns, not just problems. When confronted with a specific problem, our natural inclination is to tackle it head-on, but in a complex system, stepping back from the problem at hand allows us to see something more important, the patterns behind the problem. Identifying these patterns and the ways they drive the larger system is more important than focusing on just the problem itself.
Take a problem like high blood pressure. Treating the condition itself is important, but the way to sustaining better health is to look for patterns in factors such as diet, exercise, stress, and underlying disease, all of which affect and are affected by each other. Using medication can lower blood pressure, but if the treatment doesn't address the underlying patterns and their interconnections, your health is still at risk.
Seeing patterns helps us recognize where we can unlock change rather than imposing change. When trying to address a complex challenge, we can sometimes get too focused on looking for the broken part and then trying to parachute in with a fix. But systems aren't broken. In fact, the forces needed to improve systems' health are already within it. Our job is to find and unlock these forces so that the system can change itself, either by strengthening the forces that make it healthier or by weakening ones that make it unhealthy.
Vaccines are a good example of this. They engage the system by strengthening T cells and antibodies, building up these positive forces allows them to continue to recognize and fight the organisms that want to weaken the system. Rather than trying to save the system from outside, vaccines are unlocking the forces within the system that can help the body stay healthy.
Of course, when things are complicated, not everything goes as planned. That's why the last mindset shift is plan to adapt, don't stay the course. In the social impact world, there's an understandable value placed on finding a solution and staying the course. Changes in approach are not always viewed favorably, but dynamic systems are always shifting, and that requires us to adapt.
We are like sailors. We start by mapping a course, but know full well that once we get beyond the first buoy, we'll have to adjust the course based on winds, currents, and obstacles that may lie above or below the surface. Likewise, we strive to navigate ever-changing dynamics while still keeping an eye on the horizon.
At the Omidyar Group, we know achieving enduring social change requires the ongoing effort of many people over many years. At times, working on such tough, intractable challenges can feel daunting, even disheartening, because the road ahead is long and uncertain. However, a manageable first step on this journey is for each of us to cultivate these 4 mindsets for ourselves. Each of us can strive to seek health, not mission accomplished. See patterns, not just problems. Unlock change, don't impose it. And plan to adapt, don't stay the course.
These mindset shifts won't provide easy or quick answers, but they will help us see new ways to approach intractable problems. And ultimately, we can collectively create the enduring social change we seek by improving the health of the systems around us.
Any thoughts? How on earth might that relate to the work that you do in your communities, in your organizations?
I think the first thing is going to be understanding the system and recognizing that we're dealing with a system rather than, that linear sort of cause and effect. And yeah, that's the stepping stone then to be able to look at the different challenges, or as it said in the video, sort of like unlock the sort of the thing that's already integrated within it to bring about change. So yeah, I guess identifying and understanding would be sort of the first step.
Anyone else?
Something that just came to my mind when I was watching the video is a challenge that I'm having right now in terms of my work. And kind of that remind me that I have to plan to, one of the mindset that was plan to adapt, because I was getting very frustrated because I wanted to get to be, and there's so many things that it's just, the process I'm trying to create is so complex that I was just getting very frustrated. But that made me think that, maybe I need to adapt to get to be, instead of just follow that straight line that I was thinking. I was just, and don't seek the problems, but the
patterns,
yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Because the suggestion in systems thinking is that the patterns, if we could interrupt the patterns, we then interrupt the system. And so the example that they gave us with high blood pressure, we can take pills, as I do, to keep our blood pressure under control. Or we can say, hang on, there are certain patterns in our life that are causing high blood pressure. We're overweight, we smoke, we're not doing enough exercise, and that actually we can take pills which will keep it under control. But if we're really going to solve it, we have to solve those patterns which are contributing to the problem.
Yeah, I really like that bit. I thought that made a lot of sense, actually, because it's about tackling the core issue, really, isn't it? Or issues. rather than just sort of, I'm not saying you're dancing around it when you're taking something for your high blood pressure, but actually, in some ways, some people find that slightly easier to do because it's, you know, they still think they're kind of dealing with it, but really they're not on a deeper level, if you know what I mean. So I think, yeah, taking that deep dive to actually say, well, actually, what would be the best thing to do? How can I really solve this? How can I, you know, and maybe doing a little bit at a time, but, you know, how can I be healthier? You know, can I eat better? Can I do a bit more exercise? Could I, you know, cut out the Friday night pizza? You know, I don't know. But you know what I mean? It means really looking at it. And sometimes that's not an easy thing for people to do. It's not easy. I mean, working with the community groups in particular, you know, they have their own ways of doing things. And some of them have done it for a long time. And they say to me, well, but we've always done it like that. But then they haven't really got to they haven't really moved on, if that makes any sense, or they haven't really got to the root cause of why it is the way it is. So getting them to have a look at that, really have a look at that. Sometimes, yeah, that can be complex or complicated. It can be. That has its own challenges, doesn't it?
And quite often we want to go, don't we? We want to go from problem to solution. You know, an example in a film that I'm not going to have time to show looks at I think it's in in fact, there's an English-based example, which was the people who ask you for blood donors were not getting enough blood, and they thought, hang on, let's pay people for blood. And so they started paying for blood, and what happened was there's a massive reduction in the people that donated blood. And it's because when they started paying people, those people that came just because they wanted to be altruistic and they wanted to feel good about themselves, giving something for nothing, stopped coming. And actually, therefore, they got less blood when they started paying people to give blood. So they stopped it, you know, and that the blood that they were getting when they were paying people for blood was of a different quality, because they started getting a lot of people who were homeless, who were hungry, who were all of those things, who wanted to give blood to get money. Yeah. And so sometimes when we jump from problem to solution without kind of looking at the system, what we end up doing is coming up with the completely wrong system. The example in Washington was that they were pumping lots and lots of resources into homelessness, and actually finding that the more homeless hostels they were building was the more people were becoming homeless. And when they looked at the whole system, what they started doing was investing actually in building new housing rather than building new homeless shelters, and that investment reduced the number of people who were homeless. And so sometimes when we just go straight from problem to solution without looking at the system, what are the patterns in this system that's keeping this thing alive? Unless we see the patterns and try to work with the patterns, we actually don't have the impact that we want to have on the system. Any thoughts? It's gone much quicker than I thought. In fact, I'll give you the link to it now. How do I copy the link? Yeah, link copied. So I'll put the link to the resources in the chat now, and so people can copy it or click on it and save it later or something. But there are some. The film we just watched is in there. There are some, and people may have seen it before, but there's the speech, the talk by Chimamanda on the single story, which is also in there, because the idea of the way that people think about Africa in a kind of uncomplicated, unsystem-like way is kind of, she's there, I think, talking about systems. So that kind of TED talk is in there as well. There's also some things on complexity and complicated. And also there's some stuff on kind of leverage points. It's about kind of thinking about your system once you've kind of recognized your system, and it's how we begin to identify the leverage points in that system. Where is it open to making change? Because quite often we're kind of banging away at a point in the system that we're trying to change where there's no leverage for change, where the resistance is always going to be too strong to have an impact on the system, and we might be better to use our energy at a different point in the same system.
Can I just say, I want to pick up a point that Kevin mentioned earlier, which I think it is a really critical point that he was raising about organizations understanding the spaces or what's happening around in a way. And I think that that's a challenge for a lot of organizations, isn't it? Is that you either deal with that micro problem, concern, situation, and not really linking in or understanding the wider sort of environment, which are systems, because we're not alone, we're cogs within the cogs. And so sometimes if you're not careful, you spend all that time just fixating and focused on that and not understanding. Therefore, understanding the wider can enable you to possibly look for those leverage points. So I think that is a real critical point, especially for organizations who are starting out. Because whilst it might seems large, but you put yourself into that large space. If you see what I mean? If you didn't want to put yourself into that large space, you won't become an organization. And by definition, the organizations are part of an emerging and or existing system framework. And so for those organizations trying not to be part of the system, don't become an organization.
Well, we
or
have
certain types of organizations.
Part of the system. We have no choice but to be part of systems, not the system.
Yeah, that's it.
We are all
system.
part of systems.
Yeah.
And we all constantly operate within systems. And and what systems change says is just understand the system of the change that you're trying to make. Accept it with all of its complexity. So don't try to reduce it to the simplest thing that I can do, but accept it with all of its complexity and try constantly to work with the complexity of it.
Yeah, no problem.
By searching for leverage. Any final questions or thoughts? Joseph, sorry.
If I may ask, you've along the line, you've introduced pattern again. So what's the difference between pattern and system? It seems to be trying to confuse us.
Okay, the patterns are the things that make up the system.
Okay.
Yeah. And because if I walk along my road and look at the pavement, yeah, there is a kind of very definite pattern on the pavement. I mean, it goes 2-1, 2-1, 2-1. We used to play hopscotch to it when I was a kid, yeah, or champ or something. And so the patterns are those things that are kind of. I recently did looked at the system of kind of policing Black people in the United Kingdom, yeah? And when we looked at it, we found that there was one really, really obvious pattern. And the obvious pattern was that there would be an explosion of some sort, an explosion of anger, followed by a report, followed by a lot of noise, followed by nothing, by no action. And if you look at all of the kind of times that Black people have exploded in the UK, we have the Scarman report, we have all of these reports, and no action was taken on the basis of any of the recommendations of the report. Yeah, and so we see that as identify that as a pattern in this kind of system. Yeah, and so we say, well, what do we do about that aspect of this pattern? What do we do about the fact that nobody acts on any of the recommendations of any reports about Black people and policing. You know, and there's a clear pattern there. And so what we do is that we just take whichever system we're working on, and we look for the patterns. What are the things that consistently happen within this system, and how do we make changes to those things?
So in essence, the police system is the establishment itself is a system, the running of it, and this particular aspect of it, which is about Black, relating to Black people's blah blah, is a pattern. Brought out a pattern of, maybe a pattern of behavior or so, on the side within the system.
You decide where the system starts, and quite often when you're doing systems work, the most difficult part of your job is to bracket the system and decide what is the system that we're looking at. Because you're right, with that one, we could be looking at something so vast it becomes difficult to see.
Yeah.
And so it's up to you to put a bracket around the system that you want to be working with.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we put our bracket when we were doing that piece of work around relationship, the relationship between Black people and the police. And that's what we used as our bracket. But we could have bracketed it all over the place.
Yeah.
It always happens with systems thinking is that we never have enough time. And that there's always so much more that we can kind of say and do. There are some kind of do-at-home courses. I'll put them in the Google Drive as well if people want to kind of follow up and do some more work of their own. And Ubele, in the normal world, I would say to you, over the summer, we're running 2 systems courses in Crete that you could have joined in, which are 1-week courses. I'm not sure what's happening this year because of the lockdown and the lock-in and the lock-up. But keep an eye on our website, keep an eye on our newsletters, and keep an eye on our program called the Ubuntu program, or MEL Europe, on our website, because we're going to have at least 2 week-long system courses in Crete this year. So I'd like to thank you very much.